Hi, and welcome to What's Going On in Here Anyway? My name is John Goldberg, and with me are my co-author Barry Friedman and Claire Sooney, illustrator extraordinaire and Harvard Law student. We're here tonight to answer your questions about law school exams, the questions you've submitted already, and if you want to submit live, just follow the instructions on the screen. You probably know about us from the book, Open Book, or maybe from our website. Make sure to check those out. We think a lot of what we say here, of course, is consistent with what's on those materials. And when you go to the website, make sure to look for the Commons. The Commons is the premium content part of the site, but you can only get there with a code that's in the book. And it's right here on the front cover. Scratch and sniff. You'll love it, and it's great. Before we get to the questions, I just want to hand things over to Barry for a minute, and then we'll get going.
Thanks, John. Hi, Claire. It's good to be here, and thanks so much for sending us your questions. We've appreciated them. What we did is we shuffled them all together and tried to put them in a logical order to tell you what it is that you want to know. So we're going to talk first about what's going on in the classroom and what's the approach to teaching in the first year, and then how you can prepare for class the best way, and also how to participate the best way in class. We'll talk some about whether to use supplemental materials. We got a lot of questions about that. And even a little bit about wellness and professional development, which we had people ask about. One thing we're not going to talk about a lot tonight is outlining an exam preparation, and there are two reasons for that. The first is that we think it's too early to be thinking about that. We're going to tell you what to be thinking about now, but outlining an exam preparation will come later in the semester. And second, because at that point we're going to do another webcast. So on November 7th, in the evening just like this, we're going to go live again and we're going to talk to you about how to outline for exams and how to prepare for exams.
Great. All right, well, I'll start us out. We have a lot of just really basic questions about general class, and so I was thinking that maybe, Barry, you could start us out with speaking to why it is that professors teach the way that they do, and specifically why they work with hypotheticals rather than quizzing us on the actual law.
Sure. I hear this from students, and I often wonder what they expect would happen in the classroom. And we'd got a place on the website to contact us, and we'd be curious to hear what you thought was going to happen when you came to law school. I think a lot of students think that they're going to get a bunch of rules that they have to learn, and they're going to get quizzed on those rules. That's what people tell us. And if that were true, we'd hand you a big book of rules, and we'd have you memorize the rules, and we'd quiz you on them, which is exactly what's going to happen. You'll see soon enough when you study for the bar. But the critical part of class isn't learning those rules. We actually think that's the easy part of what's going on. What's special about law school is that once you've learned those rules, you have to learn to manipulate them, to work with them, to make arguments on both sides of the rules to represent your clients. And that's the essential part of what's happening in the classroom.
Mary, you said manipulate. That's a word that has some negative connotations, like being sneaky or tricky. Is that what you meant?
Well, I know people accuse lawyers of that, and I think that's unfortunate. It isn't what I meant. I meant manipulate in the sense of manipulating terms in an equation or manipulating physical objects. So the best way to understand this is to think about a courtroom. That's what people think about when they're learning law anyway. And if you think about a courtroom, you've got plaintiffs and you've got defendant. And they've come to court, they're arguing about the facts, and they're arguing about the law. But one of the things that you see is that very often neither the plaintiff nor the defendant disagrees about the applicable legal rules. Sometimes they do, but often they agree. They just disagree about who wins under that rule. And so what's being taught in class, what's so critically important to understand is that, of course, you have to learn the rule, but what you're trying to learn is how to make good arguments about how to use those rules to favor your client.
Okay, that makes sense. Maybe I'll move to another question, and maybe, John, you could speak to this. So I have Will M. from Lewis and Clark here, who just asked, do my classes generally prepare me to take an end-of-semester exam, or do I have to do that prep on my own?
Sure. Well, let's hope they prepare you. I think they do, and then most law professors think they do, but they do it in an indirect way, right? Mm-hmm. So, as you know, in class you read judicial opinions primarily, also statutes, things like that, and it's the rare law school exam that says, here's a judicial opinion, read it and analyze it. It happens sometimes, but it's pretty unusual. Rather, on a law school exam, you're typically given a fact pattern, as we discuss in the book, and you're asked to analyze the fact pattern. You're put in the position of a lawyer or a judge and say, what do you do given what are the applicable rules and how do they apply to this case? Mm-hmm. So what do the two have to do with one another? Well, in some ways, each judicial opinion that you read as a law student is a practice exam. It's a little mini exam, right? Because you're watching the judge or the court go through the paces. stating the facts, analyzing the issues, and so on and so forth. So at some level, you're seeing firsthand demonstrated again and again and again every day exactly the kind of analysis that you're going to be asked to do on your own when it comes time for an exam.
Okay. I think I hear you speaking to this both a little bit, but I have another question here from Todd B. at University of Michigan Law School, who's asking what connection there is then between the skills of taking an issue spotting exam and then being an actual lawyer in practice. Maybe Barry, you could speak to that.
Sure. I actually want to follow up a little bit on what John said. So to go back to my original answer, and I'm afraid it's going to sound like a mantra from me, but I think it's the thing law students are least familiar with, most surprised to learn, which is that it's not just these rules but these arguments. So as you read the cases, I think the preparation often is in seeing how once you discover the rule in the case, you then learn how it might apply to different hypotheticals. And we might even try to take a hypothetical later and talk a little bit about how that would work. Well, what does that have to do with being a lawyer? Law students complain all the time that they're not being tested on what it takes to be a good lawyer. And there may be some truth to that. We don't test people on timekeeping or business development or how to use using the telephone, good telephone etiquette, though sometimes I think that we should. But there's one way in which taking exams is exactly like being a lawyer, and it's the critical thing to see. So imagine you're a lawyer and you're sitting in your office and you finished law school and you've got all your training. Mm-hmm. What's going to happen? Someone's going to walk into your office and they're going to tell you a story. They're going to say, you know, this is what happened to me, or this is what happened to somebody else. And we need to research, we need to learn. And it's going to be your job to interpret that story through the lens of the law and to say, well, these are the legal issues and these are the arguments that we can make under those legal rules to help our client. And so in some sense, fact pattern exams are precisely like what a lawyer does all day long.
All right. Maybe taking a step back then from talking about being a lawyer and going back to kind of class and prep of law school. We have a lot of questions in general about briefing cases and time management, et cetera. So I have a question here from Rachel H. from Notre Dame Law School, who asks what needs to be in a case brief and what do you need to know when prepping that case brief?
Sure, I'm happy to address that. The brief, as you know, is a summary of the case you're reading, and the whole goal here is to get yourself trained in breaking down sometimes long and complicated opinions into a simple, succinct statement where you can practice isolating the relevant facts. Often cases will have endless stories of endless amount of facts, very few of which matter. Right? There are key facts that you need to know, and part of what you're doing when you're briefing is getting in the habit of getting to the point. Can I state the facts in a few sentences instead of paragraphs? Right? Likewise, procedural posture, what court are we in, where did it come from, framing the issue, which is the hardest thing to do as a new law student for many law students. What exactly, how precisely do I describe what the legal issue is that the court whose opinion I'm reading is getting at? So what briefing is really about is practicing legal analysis. It's about practicing the kind of arguments that Barry's been talking about, where you get into the habit of saying, all right, I understand the issue, I understand the rule, and now I'm in a position to make arguments based on my understanding of the issue and the rule.
Okay, so I'm sorry, can you summarize again just real quick? So we've got, you said facts, issue, rule.
Absolutely. So the standard way to do it, and it's described in the book, is exactly that. So it's facts, procedural posture, issue, rule, holding, and sometimes justification, but the exact form doesn't matter so much as you make sure to work through systematically the opinion that you're reading, to be active, to be engaged, to be trying to frame things rather than just to kind of look at it and go, oh yeah, I kind of see what's going on here.
Right, okay. And then we have Josh E. from University of Arkansas Law School, who asks whether briefing cases is an efficient way to prepare for classes, or whether you're okay just taking notes and, you know, sort of briefing in the book, kind of underlining things in the book as you go.
Right. You want to take that?
Sure. I mean, either way. By the way, I wanted to emphasize the chapter 13 of the book is where we talk about briefing, and we've explained a lot of the details of briefing there. So upper class students will do this. They'll do book briefing where they take their book and I'm sure you do some of that yourself. Never do that. And they put a big R next to the rule and they put an I next to the issue. And that's great once you understand what a rule is and when you understand what the issue is. And this is, one of the mysteries. I remember being a 1L student long ago and thinking, how did everybody know where the rule was in that case? And now you understand, well, lawyers instinctively can all find the rule. But when you're trying to learn it yourself, you have to find things. And the way to do that is actually to work through writing down the facts and writing down the issue, struggling with it, like John says, taking your stab at identifying the rule, which you're going to find when you go to class you've misidentified a lot early on. And so I don't think there's any substitute for doing it yourself. And in fact, when students come to me at the end of the semester and say, I was really bummed about my grade, I wanted to talk about that, I always ask the same question up front, which is, did you brief all the cases?
Right.
Because that, to me, is such an essential thing to do.
Can I just add one little
please.
tiny point on this, because briefing is so basic and so important, because it really is about reading and thinking like a lawyer. Another great thing about briefing and coming to class with your briefs done or almost done is it's a great way to check your progress. Law students justifiably complain that they don't get enough feedback during the semester. They work and work and work and work, and then come week 12, 13, 14, suddenly there's an exam. If you're looking for ways to find feedback, there are a number of them, and we have suggestions about that. But one of the easy ways to do it is to bring your briefing class, and if you're not the student on call or one of the students on call, just follow along and see how other students have framed the issue or how the professor highlights the rule, because you can score and say, oh, you know what, I did a pretty good job with the facts, check plus, or I didn't quite get that issue right. It's a great way just to begin to track whether you're starting to get it. Again, as Barry said, it's at the beginning it's hard and you're going to get a lot wrong, and that's fine and that's normal. You're learning a new language. But as you get better at it, you should start seeing your brief correlate more and more with what's going on in class.
Okay, that makes sense. So now, although is really busy,
Yes.
and there's a lot going on, and it's hard to ever find, you feel like you can't find time for anything.
Absolutely.
So what do you do then if you fall behind in class? And actually I have a question here from Darius P. from Suffolk Law School, who specifically wants to know, how do you adjust when there's only a shorter period of time left before the exam?
Yeah. Well, it's inevitable. It's impossible to stay on top of everything. It is a very demanding course of study, and most people find themselves behind occasionally or missing something, and sometimes subjects click, sometimes they don't. Different students do it differently. My advice is don't get too hung up on something you're stuck on. Keep moving forward. Stay with the class rather than go back and read something again that you've already covered. You can come back. There'll be time. There's usually a 2, 3, 4 day study period during exam period where you'll have the opportunity to review outlining. You may find that when you start outlining, and we'll talk about that later, when you start outlining, suddenly you'll be like, oh, I get it, right? Because you have more context in which to understand it. So don't get too hung up on it. Move forward, keep going. You'll get back to it. You'll figure it out.
Yeah, students say all the time, this really came together at the end. And what they're referring to is when they went back through their class notes and they started to do an outline. And again, on the Commons, we have examples of all different ways to outline. But it's that sense of, that's when you need to put it together. I tell people at the beginning, don't worry if it's not all making sense. It's like learning a foreign language. Let it wash over you. You can't learn a foreign language by looking up every single word in the dictionary and trying to put them all together. You'll never get anywhere. But if you just sort of sit and listen for a while, all of a sudden things start to click, and that's kind of the best way to go about it.
Okay. What about within that? What about using study aids then? At what point in the in the process do you begin to use study aids? And I remember just as a 1L coming in and thinking that study aids were sort of like cheating or like buying the Cliff Notes type thing, and it just felt really sort of academically insincere. But then I also remember sitting in class and looking around and everyone around me opening up their study aids and feeling like I was falling behind or missing out.
Maybe I need to get me some of those.
Yeah, at a disadvantage though, really. I mean, if everyone is using them. So what's your recommendation there?
So I think the thing about study aids is the most important question isn't whether to have them or which ones to get, but how to use them. They have an important role to play, but it's a limited role, and you need to understand that. So study aids tend to be the rules, the black letter law that we're talking about earlier. And they can't tell you how to make the arguments. The best that they can do, that some of them will do, is give, like a horn book might give you the policies underlying the rule. And that's useful because that will help you learn to manipulate those rules. But so students ask me all the time, not should I be using study aids, but which one's best? I can't understand constitutional law. Should I be using Chemerinsky? And I always say it's a great book, and you might want to have that book. For now, try to go to class and understand what's going on in class. And then later, when you go back over the material in your notes, when you're doing your outline, that's a great time to consult those, understanding. And again, my mantra again, but when things go wrong, the one that often goes wrong is people say, well, I knew everything. But knowing everything is only, that's what we expect everybody to know everything. It's then how to use it. And all of those sources won't help you do that.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. That may or may not have happened to me as a class teacher. But all right. So moving back into class then, and the sort of class experience. How do you feel about students who participate heavily in class and whether they perform better on exams or not? Is that sort of your sense? Or?
So, law school, we like to say in both of our classes, is a community, and law classrooms are communities, and you're members of communities, you're members of these special communities, and that's great in so many ways. You will make friends for life in the first year of law school because it's such a bonding experience. But as members of community, you have what might be described as sort of communal responsibilities, and part of it is to be thoughtful about the role you're playing in your community. And so when it comes to class participation, there's kind of norms of how you ought to do things, and I'll borrow here from Barry. The Goldilocks Norm is an excellent norm in this context, which is not too little, not too much, just right. If you have your hand up all the time, you're probably annoying some people, including possibly the professor. If you're hiding in the back with your cap down, buried in your laptop or your book, you know who you are, then that's a problem too. You need to participate. It's part of becoming a lawyer. Yes, you're actually going to have to speak as a lawyer, no matter what kind of law you do. And this is how you learn, and this is how you think under pressure, which is part of exam taking. So class participation is important. It doesn't mean you should be speaking every minute or volunteering every minute. It just means you need to be part of the community.
So I just want to add a word about participation. I do love the Goldilocks analogy, and one of my favorite of Claire's wonderful illustrations in the book is the Goldilocks strip about participating in class. And we also have up on the website in the Commons another favorite of mine from you, Claire's, which is all the different ways that people raise their hand in class. And I'm sure if you're a law student listening, you have lots of thoughts about the people participating in class. But participate's a funny verb, and I want to say something critical about it. So I think everyone is participating in class at every moment. That's the theory of this kind of teaching. That's why we do this asking questions and answering. And the very best thing you can do for yourself in law school, if you said, what's the one thing I can do to do well in law school? It's that you are active in your mind in class all the time. That when the professor says, Ms. Suni, what are the facts of McCulloch versus Maryland? You don't think, well, I'm not Ms. Suni, so I'm going to check my Facebook page, and I've already got the facts here. But here's how I would answer that question. And then when the professor says, but is that a correct understanding of the Commerce Clause? In your head, not you, because you're being called on, but
Right.
John is sitting there thinking, that's my answer. And then comparing your answer to what the professor has to say next in class. And so everybody should be participating all the time.
All right.
That's a great point.
That makes sense. Now, to circle back just a little bit, I actually just got a question in just now from Andy at UVA, who's asking about civil procedure specifically, and about how that class differs from contracts, criminal law, and even torts. And so what's the best way to prepare for civil procedure specifically in this context of, being ready to speak, et cetera?
Right.
I can't. Do you teach civil procedure?
I have taught it.
I actually started out teaching civil procedure, and I'm thinking about going back to teaching civil procedure, in part because I love teaching in the first semester, and that's how I would do it. So there's sort of two parts to civil procedure, and it's useful to think about them separately. So I don't know how Andy has started out. If Andy's doing personal jurisdiction, that's a common law, very much of a common law sort of subject, and he's learning the cases and learning how the rule changes from case to case, and that's, again, this rule manipulation, learning how the rule gets stretched in one direction or another. But a lot of civil procedure is rules. There's, how you take depositions or how you conduct discovery, and it is different than class. I mean, one thing I'll say is it's much more code-driven, and so even parts of criminal law or contract law are more code-driven. And it's true, but the thing to do is to think about those rules just like you would think about rules in cases. Ask similar questions. Do the rules make sense? Would you have written them differently? What is the injustice in some of those rules? What's the justice in those rules? But I think it's fair to say, and everybody in civil procedure, right, they're doing contracts, torts, and civil procedure, and it's like which one of these is not like the other one?
Yeah. All right, great. Okay, so then going back into this discussion of being in the classroom, Here's somebody asking, it's Brian W. From University of Arkansas again, asking, how do you handle the feeling of being the only person in the classroom that doesn't understand a certain discussion, and sort of what, you know,
That's not happening to anybody else. It's
No,
only
no,
Brian.
Right.
Poor Brian.
Right.
Oh, you're so
What must
mean.
that be like?
Yeah, no, it happens. It literally happens to everyone, it's a terrible feeling, because you know there are moments when you feel like everyone's getting it and you're not. Well, that's wrong. No matter what anybody tells you, it's not true. The thing we've noticed in our careers, both as students and as professors, is for reasons that are hard to understand, different subjects and even different topics within different subjects come more or less easily to different people. And so you find that there are people who just find contracts completely intuitive. They almost don't need to take the class, but they should, because it just makes sense to them. And then other people who say, I can't make head or tail of contracts, but give me torts, I can talk about that all day. So it's perfectly normal to feel out of sorts, particularly in one class or another, or on one topic or another. The thing to do is to not worry, not panic. Again, as Barry said, a lot of this will come together at the end. A lot of it is learning. You have to learn a lot to know something. And this is true of procedure, by the way, too. A lot of the procedural rules that seem very technical, and it's like, why would anyone come up with that rule? Well, once you start to understand more, for example, about tort litigation or contract litigation, the substance, you start to see, oh, okay, I see why they do it that way. I see why we want summary judgment to look like that. So take a breath. It's going to be okay. You mentioned study aids earlier and supplements earlier. If there's something that, just like a particular topic that's just driving you crazy, you just can't get your head around it, happens all the time, that's a good time to consult, for example, a treatise. You don't want to read a treatise cover to cover. You'll go nuts and it's boring. No offense to treatise writers, but what you would want to do is say, you know, I don't understand the rule against perpetuities. All right, so go find the property treatise and look through those. Don't spend a lot of time, but look through it and see if that helps get through the sort of mental roadblock.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I want to interject just two thoughts. One is we haven't really talked about study groups, and maybe we should talk a little bit about study groups. And in fact, I will in just a second. But the other thing is, I'd be curious to have, because John mentioned the rule against perpetuities, and I'm relatively confident I still don't understand the rule against perpetuities. But I'd be interested to have people write us on our website and tell us what are some of the doctrines that are proving most difficult. I know res judicata, which is another one that will come up in civil procedure, because we might think of some way to be able to address those for folks in the Commons afterwards. But let's talk for a minute about study groups, because I get asked a lot about study groups. Everybody has to do what's right for them in terms of study groups. I remember at the beginning of law school still the scramble about, are you in a study group, and are you in the right study group? And
high school all over again.
That's exactly right. And I found that I worked best with one other guy when it came close to exams, but I did a lot of my studying on my own, except civil procedure. We had this big group of us trying to cover all of it. But the advantage of having some group of friends in law school that you can talk to is that when you're confused, it helps to be able to ask people, I'm lost, or you lost too.
Right.
And first, you'll find other people are lost, and that's reassuring. And the other thing that happens, though, is that somebody will have figured it out. Somebody will say, no, this is how it works. And you can teach each other. It doesn't just have to be professor to student. And I think that's one of the things I liked best about law school.
Okay. What about going to see the professor? Because I remember, again, as a 1L, I felt like everyone around me had these burning questions for the professor, and I was just kind of like, well, I got the lecture, I got this lecture, so at what point do you think it's important to be developing that relationship outside of class or not?
Well, never go see your professor. Leave us alone. No, I'm kidding.
Call John.
There's a couple of issues there. One is you definitely, over the course of your law school career, want to get to know some professors. You want to leave law school, and that's down the road for people who are just starting, with some mentors, and it's for its own sake and because you'll want references and things like that. So you definitely want to get to know your professors, and we try very hard to get to know our students. Some of us are better at it than others, but when there's 80, 90, 100 students in a 1L class, you're not going to get to know them very well anyway, just by class interaction. So it's good to take the opportunity if professors have office hours, or maybe after class they're just standing around the podium answering questions. It's good to occasionally interact with the professor that way, but do it in a thoughtful way, because you're asking questions and you have questions, and that's totally legitimate, but you also are making an impression, and you want to make a good impression, other things being equal. That doesn't mean you have to know the answer to the question and sound like a kind of smarty pants, but it does mean you have to have thoughtful questions. And so walking into the professor's office during office hours and saying, I don't understand proximate cause, explain it to me, is not going to be the kind of message you want to send to the professor. On the other hand, if you walk in and say, I have a study group, we've been talking about this case, and there's this issue that's just driving us crazy, we can't figure it out, we thought it was this, but then we thought it was that, can you help us? That shows that you're thinking, which is the key,
right.
And it conveys to the professor that you're really there to learn and to do what it takes to learn.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we like this. You know, we're nerds. That's why we do what we do. We
Speak for yourself.
You're much more of a nerd than I am. So we care about this stuff, and when students come to us with interesting questions, we like to engage on those terms, and I think that's critical. The other point I'd make, as it goes back to class participation, is we get asked to write lots of reference letters. It's just the nature of what we do, and we're glad to do it. We're glad to have people get cool jobs and go get clerkships and find rewarding employment, and often I have this experience where a student will come to me who did really well on the exam and say, will you write me a letter?
Right.
But that student never talked all semester long, and so I know nothing about them except that I graded an anonymous exam. And so this is a reason that class participation actually matters, which is it just helps us get to know you. And we actually do want to get to know our students. I may not always feel that way, but we do want to get to know our students. I very much want to, and it helps me if somebody interacts with me that way.
Okay, this actually is directly pertaining, sort of. I just got another question in live from a Marie who didn't provide her school, but she says that, or she wants to know rather, how she can get feedback from the professor to see how she's doing in class and how her responses are,
right.
Especially given that the exam isn't until the end. How do you get that feedback?
Right. Well,
Funny you should ask.
You want to start?
Sure. I mean, it's a frustrating thing about law school. When I went to law school, and we had to walk 12 miles through the snow to get there every day. We had all of our exams at the end of the year. I mean, most schools now do it at the end of the semester, but we went all the way to the end of the year. And if you can just imagine the anxiety level in the building around about March, because nobody has any clue how they're doing. So one thing that we've done, when the book was reviewed, many people said, we really want more feedback. We crave feedback.
Right.
And so we've actually created something that we're going to provide on the website. We're going to sell on the website, practice exams. And it's too early to think about practice exams. We don't really want anybody thinking about that now. And I should also say the very best practice exams you can do are ones from your professor, because then you're going to get this feedback from the professor in a very direct way. Even though you're not in the professor's office talking, you'll take the exam the professor gave a prior year, and maybe there'll be a model answer. But we also are going to have on the website, we went to professors all over the country, and we had them create, to give us an exam, a model answer, to annotate the exam so you could see where all the issues were hidden. And we had them take actual student exams, anonymously, of course, and mark those up too. Because, I mean, it's just a fact that there's not enough feedback in law school, and we should be honest about that. But we've tried to figure out a way to get you some of that, to see how it works.
Right.
Yeah, and that'll be online soon, and we really think it will be a great resource for students to see what this is a peek inside the mind, the scary mind of the law professor, because you'll see through the annotations on the various documents, you'll see what the professor was thinking. Oh, I put this fact in here for a reason, and the reason was X, or a comment on one of an actual student exam answer saying, well, this is what the student did exactly right, and this is what the student messed up. That's, we hope, really meaningful feedback.
Yeah.
Along the way, as we talked about a moment ago, checking yourself against class, checking your brief against class, checking what's going on in your head against class. When the professor says, is having a colloquy with a student on call and you're not on call, you can check yourself, and that's a good way to get feedback. But it's all second best, and we're working hard to figure out ways to make it better.
And I know you probably want to get to something else, but I just want to go back to my mantra yet again, because this is actually something that I think a tangible example of students not understanding the importance of arguments, right? So, what would you want feedback from the professor about? Are you understanding the rules? Well, you can check a treatise for that. And what's ineffable about law school is the understanding whether you're making good and bad arguments, and there's sort of no way to figure that out but to sit there in class and listen. So I've often thought, why do we teach the way that we teach? And it's occurred to me that the reason is because since we're trying to teach people how to make legal arguments, it's hard to write up. I mean, try it sometime. What's a good or a bad legal argument, right? It's very hard to do it. And so at some level what we do at class, and it might even work better back in the day when professors were harsher than I think they probably are today, which is you ask a question, a student gives an answer, and then, it's either thumbs up or thumbs down.
Right.
And only by sitting there over and over again and listening to that, you sort of get, okay, those were good answers and those were bad answers, and I'm starting to get a feel for what's a good argument now.
All right. You're actually speaking, this is great, you're speaking right to these questions that are coming in live. I just got another one that sort of fits here from a Bethany C. at Harvard, who's asking, how do you regain your confidence after you keep getting questions wrong in class?
It's a great question.
Up on that bike.
Well, it's a great question, and it is being on call and it going poorly or poorly in your mind. First of all, it probably didn't go as badly as you think, but there are moments when everyone gets flustered or flummoxed by a question, and the professor basically, there's a famous line that professors will use, sort of, you had a 50-50 chance, sorry, if it's a yes or no question, but I think the thing to realize is, as Barry said, this is practice. A lot of these questions are not about, guess what I'm thinking, or the right answer is X, give me the right answer. A lot of this is giving students opportunity to practice articulating themselves and articulating their reasons and articulating their positions. And again, the language metaphor, I think, is incredibly helpful here. Think of it as practicing your French, right, or practicing your Latin. You have to utter the sentences, and it takes a while to get the hang of uttering legal sentences and legal arguments. So it's not so much that you blew the question or got it wrong. You had an opportunity to practice argument. You took that opportunity. You'll keep doing it, and you'll get better.
We're also imperfect. I mean, we're imperfect, and well, at first, your perception of how you did in class is probably wildly incorrect. So I tell this to young faculty. It's great to have young faculty around because they're also into the teaching and excited and nervous about it. Not that we don't get nervous. We were just talking about that here. But I remember being a young faculty member and thinking, oh man, I just taught such a brilliant class. Or thinking, oh, it was a disaster. I have to get back in the classroom and fix it. And what you come to realize over time is, like, you thought you were up here and down there, and the students didn't really notice much happen. Well, it's the same thing when you're a student in class and you're saying something, you think, oh my God, that was so stupid, and the professor thought that was stupid. Probably not true. And one of the things we do wrong sometimes as teachers is that we don't, if we're trying to teach these arguments, we don't always do a good job of signaling whether the argument was good or bad or why it was good or bad. And so, we can improve too by saying, if we're more conscious that we're teaching arguments, by saying, that's a good argument because, or that doesn't work because the text doesn't support it, whatever's the...
That makes sense. All right. So I'm got my eye on the time here, and I'm going to move us into now sort of another segment of questions, thinking about just professional development. And so actually we had a professor write in, an NYU lawyering professor, who asks, should students be doing internships, students groups, or, et cetera, other extracurriculars the first year? And if you could maybe speak to that, one of you.
Well, this may be a joke because I got in trouble when I was the vice dean at NYU for answering this question the wrong way. I have always told law students that what they need to do is as little as possible other than go to class. And there's two reasons for that. One is because the work is challenging and you really need to focus on it. It's not high school or college where you're trying to build up this complicated resume with all your activities. Now what matters is getting the material and doing well in class. And the other, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit if we have time, is there can be some stress associated with the first year, and so if you have extra time, relax, go running, take care of yourself, go to the movies, and so I think all of that. Yeah, that's great. That's just crazy. But I was corrected. I mean, I think I was wrong. People came to me and talked to me about it, and they persuaded me that the activities do matter at some level, in part because of professional development reasons, that you need to learn about networking, that you do need some activities on your resume to signal what your interests are. And the place that I came to is a happy medium, which is, pick one activity or pick two activities most, something you're passionate about, that you care about, that's you, and do that, and then do all that other stuff. Though I'm kind of curious to ask you. I mean, you were recently a 1L. What's your advice about activities and internships and things?
Yeah, I mean, I think the activities I did were really valuable. Honestly, though, this is maybe a blend of what you're saying. My favorite activity might have been the student play that we do every year. We call it parody at Harvard, but
merciless towards the professor,
right.
As it
Which
should
was
be.
actually, I mean, it was really great because it was, it was an activity that helped me build a network at school, and it also was really, it was fun and sort of relieved a lot of stress, and in that way was kind of a relaxing,
Something
sort of more
different.
lifestyle
Yeah.
thing, but also helped me feel really connected to the school. So, I don't know. I guess I would agree with you. It is unfortunate to feel overcommitted, but I think it's also important to sort of invest in the community around you. Is maybe what I'm saying.
That's fair.
But
the other thing to keep in mind is it's 3 years of law school. It's 1 year
Right.
of 1L and 3 years of law school,
Right.
and the first year is very different and in some ways very special. As you move into your first year summer even, and certainly the fall, a lot of people start interviewing for jobs at that point. Your life is consumed by a number of other obligations and interests, and you'll look back, believe it or not, I swear, you will look back at your first year, and you know this, and we know this, and say, wow, I had so much free time just to focus on the work and on the classes, and my life wasn't so cluttered.
Right.
And that's as it should be. Don't clutter it too much, a little bit, but not too much, because this is really a special year. And 20 years from now, again, I promise it's going to happen, 20 years from now, you'll remember most your first year of law school. It's the special year. It's the year where you really immersed yourself in this foreign language and learned an art and a craft. And you'll feel really good about it. And don't detract from that by getting too sidetracked by other things.
it just went so fast.
Yeah.
That's really the thing. I wish I'd understood how fast it goes.
It really does.
All right, so moving into now talking about outlining courses, and sort of as you get further along into that first semester, at what point do you start outlining, and what outlining method do you recommend to produce the best essay writing? We got that question from a Jacqueline V.
Okay. I'll start, and
I'll correct you.
You'll correct me when I'm wrong, as you usually do. So, as Barry said at the very outset of this webcast, we're not going to spend a lot of time at this stage on outlining because it's really too early. If you're in a full semester, typical law program, 12, 13, 14 weeks, you're not ready to outline in all probability. If you want to try, go ahead. Don't spend a lot of time on it. But the fact is, outlining presupposes that you have a view of the forest, and right now you're deep in the trees. And so you're just getting to the point where you're going to start to see things connect within subjects and across subjects. So our main message is not yet. That having been said, we have lots of advice, you'll be shocked to hear, on how to do it when the time comes. It's in the book, it's on the website. As Barry said, in the Commons, we've got sample outlines for all the sort of standard first-year subjects that show different approaches, different techniques, flow charts, outlines of outlines, so on and so forth. There's plenty of time for that, and we're going to talk about it in our next webcast, and we talk about it in the book. But for now, just don't worry about it.
Yeah, I mean, you can't think about this logically. You can't. Outlining is the bird's eye view, right? It's putting it all together. Well, it's impossible to put it all together unless you have covered enough of a sweep that there's a together to put.
Right.
How was that?
I like that.
And so you need to give yourself some running room before you think about outlining. In the Commons, we have in the section called From the Book some checklists. Where if you go there, it's a PowerPoint presentation, and there are checklists that tell you different times that you might start doing things. And an idea that we had, which we have not implemented, that we'd like to think about implementing in the future, was actually to have students sign up for Twitter alerts about when they should do things, like when they should start outlining. And there is a way to sign up to get emails from us, and we will send some of that information. What we didn't conquer in time and hope to do in the future is it occurred to us everybody's on a different calendar. And so if you're on a 10-week calendar for a quarter or 14-week, we need to sort all that out. But there's a rhythm to all of this. We live that rhythm every year, twice a year, each semester. And outlining the time to start thinking about it is around Halloween. Yeah. And we'll, again, do a webcast on November 7th.
Okay. So now, do you guys want to speak at all to exam prep a little more specifically? I know you said you're going to talk about that in the future, but is there anything you want to say now? I'm thinking, I have a question that just came in from Stephanie at UNLV, who's asking about whether you'll receive feedback or comments on your exams when you take them so that you know where to improve.
So I think what I would say about preparing for exams now is to return to the mantra and remember that you're learning to make arguments and not just learning rules. And be conscious, one thing we haven't talked much about, maybe we could say a word, I know we're getting close to time, is about note-taking. But to make sure that you are, as you go through the material, thinking, what's the rule in the case I just read? And what are some examples of how it might apply? And I think that's sort of the best thing you can do to prepare for exams right now. And then I would leave everything else alone, truly, until, Halloween is, I think, traditionally for us, the cut point where we think now's the time to get frightened. and
the
so
scariest night of the year.
And so I think that's the time to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, again, you're doing it already in a way. That's what class is about. That's what cases are about. As Barry said, a lot of what's going on here is, hopefully, you're beginning to think about, as you learn the rules, which is part of the story, is thinking about how to apply them. So take a lot of the students who are watching may have torts. Take a really simple torts problem. I think it's a simple problem. There's this rule which says if you're a trespasser and you go on somebody's property and you're hurt, in a lot of states you can't recover from them because even if they were negligent, let's say they set up a crazy windmill that was dangerous and cuts people up, and they run into the windmill in the middle of the night, but they're a trespasser. They were coming to rob the house. Well, guess what? They don't recover. No duty to trespassers is how the rule is sometimes put. Okay, fine. That's the rule. We all know the rule. Great. All right, so what? Well, the point is not just to know the rule, and now start thinking about all the variations on the windmill case. And that's a lot of what class is about, and that's a lot of what hypo's about. So what if it's an 8-year-old kid who's attracted to the windmill and thinks it's really cool?
Right.
Do we have the same intuition about whether or not there's a duty owed to put a fence around the windmill or a warning or something? Well, no, we have a different intuition, and guess what? The law has a different rule, right? There's this doctrine of attractive nuisance, which says for kids, blah, blah, blah. And on we go, right? So in each case what you're doing is you're learning a rule in a certain fact situation and then being asked both in class and eventually on exams, what if we change things slightly? What if it's a kid instead of an adult, right? Are we going to apply the same rule? Why? Why not? Well, what was the original rationale for the rule? Does that rationale cover this case? That's the thing you ought to be doing. It's what you're going to be doing on exams, and it's what you should be doing already as you're participating actively in class.
Right. So in class, people ask all the time, "What am I putting in my notes? How should I take notes?" And the answer is exactly what John just said. So you should have a brief. This is the great thing about the technology in class. There's a wide debate that goes on among faculty about whether we like the laptops in class or don't like the laptops in class. It's horrible when you're teaching and everybody's got their face buried in their laptop. We're very unequivocal in the book that whether you're using a laptop or not, you ought not to be on Facebook or doing whatever else you're doing. What you're doing, and Claire's thinking, I've done that.
I'm on Facebook right now.
But it's, you've got your brief, and it's there, and the professor's asking questions, and you're checking, as John has said over and over, you're checking to see if you got it right. But at some point in your notes, it should be rule, and here's your stab of the rule based on what you're hearing in class. And then all these hypotheticals that John's I just found my notes, actually, from the first year the other day. They were not typed because we did not have laptops then. Computers were very big, and you used punch cards. But it's one question after another, and so it seems like an odd thing to be putting in your notes. But when you go back to get ready for exams, you'll find yourself working through those hypotheticals, and now you'll understand why we're pushing things one way and pushing them another. I think are we getting tight on time?
We are.
Yeah, okay. So I just want to sum up a little bit if I can. First, I'm not sure we said this clearly, and so I want to, which is in the book. We tell people, read the first chapter of the book, which is about this idea of law students, how it's like the practice of law, and read the 13th chapter of the book, which is, strangely enough, the chapter about going to law school, and don't worry too much about the rest, except the afterward maybe, that's sort of the spirit of going to law school. And that'll give you what you need to know. But most important, we just want you to remember, it's not just about learning rules, it's about learning to make arguments. And so you have to sit there patiently in class and think that that's the skill that I'm getting taught, and that's the skill that when we come back in November and tell you about outlining and preparing for exams, we're going to be talking a lot about how you translate that skill into writing good exam answers.
Yeah, and I just want to add as we wrap up, thanks very much for joining us. It's a late hour for more law school, and we're really grateful that you shared your time with us. We do have the website. There's ways to contact us on the website if you have further questions or you didn't get your questions answered, and we apologize, we just had too many questions. You should feel free to get in touch with us through the website, and we look forward to another opportunity to communicate.
Great. Before we close up, finally, we got one more burning question in just now that I think actually is a good wrap-up. It's from an Alicia, and she asks, she says that she's entering 2L here soon, and that 1L specifically was really tough, and is the book still relevant to second-year students,
question.
etc.?
I actually think that at some level, I mean, the book's directed to 1Ls because it's all new.
Right.
But, you know, the great thing about being a 2L is you've been through it once, and I actually think that you would find the book an incredibly easy read, and it was, you know, if it hasn't clicked, it will start to click, because now you know what all this stuff is, and we show you how to put it together. I mean, what we haven't talked about at all tonight is the core of the book, which talks about how to spot issues and how to apply rules to issues and how to analyze them on both sides. And so I think that Alicia would find it valuable, and we'd actually love some feedback, which is to write us. You know, one thing we haven't mentioned is we have a blog. And on the blog, we're going to answer some more of these questions. We've got some of your art up on the blog. Yeah, I know. Doodles. So we hope that this is the beginning of a conversation and not the end of one.
Great. Well, I think that puts us right at time.
Good. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Claire.
everyone.
Yeah.